It is guest time, and my first overseas guest, actually. So, welcome to the show, Miko.
Thank you, Martin. Nice to be here.
So, it says here, Chief Product Officer at Data Content Manager. Tell us a little bit about your role and little bit about Data Content Manager.
Yeah, so I basically own the product. Data Content Manager is a product that's an application running on top of ServiceNow, focusing on improving data quality. And the company I work for is called Qualdatrix, but they're better known for the product name for sure. And it's my responsibility now to kind of manage the product. And before that, I used to be consultant for quite many years, implementing service management systems and CMDBs.
That sounds very familiar to me. So
yeah,
let's get ahead and talk or set some scenes about what we're going to be talking about today, which is boosting your CMDB, which I know Data Content Manager can help with. Let's get some background. It's funny there that you should mention implementing stuff a long time ago. I'm now going to take you back to about 20 years ago when I was implementing service management tools. And at the time, everybody set up their category structures by breaking them down into hardware and software. And then underneath those layers, they'd have all their different software and hardware, equipment and packages and that type of thing. We came up with this revolutionary idea of service towers, where we would take a particular service, and the example I'm going to use here is printing out of security cards at a reception desk for visitors. So we would take that service and then break it down into its component parts, like email, the application itself, database servers, printers, and I've got a wireless router there. There would have been one 20 years ago, but a router of some description. Essentially, all the parts that made up that service would go under that service tower. So when we did our reporting, we would know which services were affected. So that was quite revolutionary sort of 20 years ago. But there were some issues with it. First of which was the reporting was really, really complicated on it, because what we were trying to do was emulate effectively a SLA matrix so that we could evaluate who was impacted and therefore work out what the urgency was of any particular call. And that was always kind of looking backwards. So what tended to happen was that the issues were already happening, and then we were just reporting on what went wrong. So roll on 20 years, the ecosystem has totally changed. At that time, we had no CMDB or no monitoring tools or anything like that. So we did not have sort of network analysis tools and database application monitoring tools, nothing like that. We didn't have a whole ecosystem of the cloud or managed service providers or external resources. It's just got more and more complicated. And as part of sorting out the CMDB, ServiceNow came up with this common services data model. But what I found really interesting was that at the heart of that model was very much this principle of breaking the application down into its component parts. It's just that we've got a lot more to deal with nowadays. So another sort of, I suppose, common theme was that even today we face the same type of problems that I was challenged with 20 years ago, in that, in my case, category structures breaking down and not working because people changed them caused us lots of big problems. Today, it's exactly the same with a CMDB. It should be at the heart of everything that you do. But what's tended to happen in the past is the CMDB has been built up organically over a period of years. And the challenges then become sort of untangling a whole network of stuff which has grown up over a long time that greatly impacts your business. So if your CMDB isn't got good data in it, then reporting isn't accurate. Automation's impossible. All of these bots and AI elements that we see advertised and demonstrated, they're no use whatsoever, because if the data's bad or in the wrong place, then nothing works. So getting your CMDB house in order is really, really important. So at this stage, I'm just going to ask the question, if anybody is watching live, and I know a lot of people in the UK are on holiday because it's a bank holiday today, but if anyone's watching live, drop in how big your CMDB is, because I'm kind of interested to see that. If people are watching on catch up, then you can still add in your comments and we can go see those a bit later on and see if we can address any comments you've got as we go along. This is a bit of a trick question because the CMDB itself is a continuous moving target. It is a living entity. Just because you've done some sort of discovery and you believe you've got a great state for your CMDB, well, I can tell you 5 minutes later that could be entirely wrong. So when I'm asking how big your CMDB, it's probably changed 5 minutes after you've answered the question. So it has become a massive, massive ball of string that needs to be untangled, and it needs some rules and regulation around it. Something like Data Content Manager is great for as a layer over the top. Jacob, that is just an astronomical amount of CIs. I really don't want to be dealing with that many CIs, that's for sure. But Mikko, unfortunately for him in his role, he does have to deal with things like that. So I'm going to hand it over to Mikko and ask him, where on earth do you start?
Yeah, where do you start? You should have a plan or some design. And you mentioned the common service data model, and that's great because earlier you had to do your designs like from scratch, figure it out all yourself. But now ServiceNow is providing some guidance and kind of best practice on what you should do and how you should kind of organize your tables, etc., or classes. So this slide here is talking about the systematic approach, and we see that quite often it's not that systematic. It's more like firefighting and kind of fixing issues when they appear, and it's quite random. And you may have a new CMDB project every year, but maybe that's not the way to do it. So it might be better to kind of establish something that is kind of business as usual and part of your everyday work. And that should start with the design. Basically figuring out what data you need related to your use cases. So how are you planning to use the CMDB and design it from that point of view?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. I've seen within the Data Content Manager tool that you have the whole blueprint designer, which visualizes the CMDB and makes those connections across them. Just explain to me how that then leads into the ability to audit and indeed, in particular, to fix things as well. How do you know when something is wrong or when something is broken?
Yeah, so the blueprint is basically a data model or visualization of a data model, as you said. But the difference is that we are talking about ServiceNow here, so the data model is defined inside ServiceNow, inside your own instance. It's not like a separate Visio diagram or a PowerPoint slide, but it's inside your instance. So it's an actionable element, and we can use that blueprint to run audits, which basically means compare your current data against the blueprint. And if the blueprint is saying something and your data is different, then we can identify the gaps and kind of report on different deviations that the audit might find. And that kind of leads us to the fixing part, that after the audit, you know what to fix. And we have this content planner module as part of our product. And there again, we use the blueprint So this time the kind of blueprint is in the background and you're working on your data on top of the blueprint. So we basically make sure that whatever you agreed to do or how you organized your data, the content planner will help you maintain it accordingly.
So that's almost like the bits that I was missing before. When somebody would come in and make a change, I had no idea who made the change, where they made the change, what the impact of the change was. But what we're saying here is we're doing a comparison, more or less. Here's what
Yeah.
we knew we had. Here's what we've got at the moment, and then highlight exceptions. Is that really the way it's working?
Well, kind of, yeah. So the designs or the blueprints should be based on the use of the data. Like how are you using? So CMDB alone is not really kind of valuable as such, but there is somebody using it, and you should make the designs in a way that what data the consumers or users need, and then you can verify if you have all the kind of bits and pieces in place. And one simple example could be that you want to report your incidents or changes based on some information that is available in the CMDB. So what is it exactly that you are looking for from the CMDB? Maybe it's like that the server record should have a reference to a customer if you happen to be a service provider or something similar like that. So yeah, you define what you need, and then we can show if that's the case. And when it comes to the content planner, I know it's quite similar in many other platforms, but in ServiceNow, if you look at all the tables in CMDB, I think there's like 800 plus by default. So without any guidance, you can get a little bit lost, like, okay, which CI classes should I use, how they should be related to each other, what kind of relationship types are available, and the content planner will kind of hide all that and make sure that you are doing exactly what was planned.
So I think that makes perfect sense to me. Just getting the planning, audit, fix, automation sorted like that. But is this a rip and replace, or is it a gradual fix when you're looking at the systematic approach to data? How does that work? Because obviously, if you've got as many CIs in your CMDB as Jacob has got, then it will be a very daunting task to just rip everything out and start all over again with a new model, because over time that will have been populated organically, and I'm sure people, when they're building anything, it becomes like a leaning tower of Pisa, and you get to a certain point where it leans a bit too far, and you'd like to start all over again. How do you evaluate whether you rip replace or whether you're actually sellotaping stuff up that's helping?
Yeah. That's a good question. It comes down to the scoping and the kind of original plan. Maybe you have a big plan to get things started, and one might consider the common service data model to be the big plan. That's the target. That's where we want to go. But then you can kind of start getting there like one small part at a time. You don't do everything at once. So you can kind of split your CMDB into smaller things and then decide that, okay, what is the most important part? What is needed the most? And who are using that data? And what is it really that they need? And then you can also do that kind of a scoping exercise and expanding the scope in a systematic way. So I really don't believe in this kind of a big bang approach when it comes to CMDB or trying to get everything under control at once. That just doesn't work.
It's not going to happen. I think.
No.
Well, there was a forum that I was on. It's a Facebook forum for IT service management type of gurus. And one of the questions on that was, what's the worst thing you've ever said as a consultant in service management? And the most amusing answer was, start with the CMDB, because they realized it was such a huge thing that they couldn't just, rip it out and replace it all. But you mentioned people. Let's get on to the next slide, because there's something which I think is relevant to all platforms, regardless of whatever they are. If you've got a CMDB, you need to know who's using it. So talk us through this particular model and where it all fits, because this is something that we never ever considered back in our day in terms of who consumed, owned and provided the data. And I think that, in today's world, which is way more complex with all of the cloud stuff and managed service providers and outsourcing and things like that, I'm not clear, looking at those titles, who would be the, I guess the consumer's relatively obvious, but the owners and the providers, that kind of is grey to me. I don't quite understand how that works. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, like if you say like one thing about the consumers, that's often kind of forgotten, even though it's maybe obvious who they are, but it's still kind of forgotten. And I've seen many kind of CMDB implementations that kind of start from the provider side. That what are all the things that we can get into the CMDB and just make it full of data without really thinking about the consumer. So in quite many cases, when we talk about IT service management, then the consumers are like service desk. They need the data to handle incidents, or it's the change managers. They need the data to run impact analysis. And these type of use cases should drive the design as well. That, okay, what data you need to do impact analysis, or what data you need in service desk to assign the tickets to the correct support team, etc. So those are the consumers, but then the owner and provider, that's also something that gets mixed a little bit quite easily. And many organizations have roles like a CMDB owner or configuration manager. And sometimes it kind of feels like they should do all the work. That, okay, you are responsible for the CMDB, so what do we have there? And the difference is that the owners kind of own the model. They should be the ones defining what goes in and how, and what requirements from the consumers we can address now, what maybe later. And then they actually discuss with the providers that, okay, how can we do this? How can we fulfill the requirements from the consumers? But they are kind of a middleman negotiating what put into the CMDB.
So the data owners then will tend to be internal staff. The data providers, internal and external. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So the providers can be like your service providers or some vendors, and quite often the data can come through an integration from another system. They can be other processes, like especially the change management process is an important provider for updating data or request fulfillment for new stuff, etc. But yeah, it's the different teams taking care of the IT infrastructure and services and applications. They are the providers, and usually it means that it's actually quite a large group of people. So maintaining a CMDB is basically everybody's job in an IT organization. It's not an island or not one-man job for sure.
It's an interesting analogy. It's everybody's responsibility, isn't it? So obviously we're talking about boosting the CMDB. So I'm just recapping as we're going along. So it's a systematic approach to data in the first place. Then it's about understanding who consumes, owns, and provides all the different data. And then I think we have another slide which is about sort of prioritization and chopping things up. Take us through this one a little bit.
So this relates to scoping and how you can do things again in a systematic way, like one step at a time. And the first step here is to select the domain or select the area that you want to focus on. And again, if we go a little bit back to the common service data model, you can think that one part of that model could be one domain, or even one table in your CMDB or one CI class. And let's use business application as an example, that you have agreed to focus on the business application data. So then you are done with the first step. And the next step there, or actually as part of the first step, you should also define who is the owner for that domain. So from the previous slide, the data owner for the business application domain. So that role is often split between several people. If you have like many configuration managers or like application portfolio managers, so that can be the owner for the business application domain. And
when you're talking about selecting the data domain, are you selecting the things that are most important? So, for instance, if you were a bank, selecting your online banking application and portfolio, would you say that's a data domain? Is that how you define a data domain?
Well, no. Data domain is more like, are you talking about applications or servers? That kind of split. But then that's kind of another level of scoping. That are you talking about the most critical applications or any application that somebody installed on their laptop? So there's also room for scoping in the later steps. But basically, in the beginning, you should agree that okay, these are our domains, and then start with one of them. And before doing anything else, you should get some commitment from the owner, the domain owner, that he or her is on top of his responsibilities. And already then the next step is to identify the providers, because the owner is not the one who is typing in details into the CMDB. It's usually somebody else. So identify the providers and then start defining that, okay, based on the requirements from the consumers, what can we set as a minimum requirement? So what is the kind of minimum level of information we should bring in so that it brings more value than cost issues or takes effort? So that's the third step, that really start with minimum, and the minimum is defined by the value. That okay, what is the minimum set of data that brings value to the consumer? And usually it's quite little. So quite often it includes some kind of identifiers that you know, like how to identify an application. Is it by name or something else? And then, for example, the responsibilities and support related details, and that's already valuable for service desk.
Yeah, I think that does make sense, because of course historically there was, as you mentioned earlier, a race to just chuck everything into the CMDB that you possibly could, and the reality is it's only any good if you're actually reporting on it, or the data is going into somewhere and is useful. There's no point in holding and maintaining it if it's not being used, I guess.
Yeah, basically, like every additional attribute you take into use, like adds to your maintenance load. Because it's not really good to just like fill some data in one time, but then you can't really know if it's still correct. As you said in the beginning, it might be outdated 5 minutes later. So somebody has to take care of that. And basically the rest of the steps here are just kind of raising the bar, like adding more requirements from the consumers based on your ability to provide the required data. And the kind of minimum viable data and the kind of next steps can also include this scoping aspect of starting from the most critical records and expanding the scope inside the domain as well. And basically the last thing is to just continue and expand to other domains, because it's a never-ending thing.
Yeah, rinse and repeat. I think that it's not something that Gartner were recently talking about. Something similar.
There was a research paper. It was originally written in 2020, but they kind of updated it now in April this year. We actually posted about it on our blog, and you can see a lot of the same things discussed on that research paper that we've been discussing here. Like putting a lot of focus on the kind of scope and what is really necessary and how to validate that you actually have proper data, etc. So yeah, that's an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah. I probably shouldn't mention Gartner. They'll probably want some money off me now for mentioning that. So this is the model. I think it all those different elements all make sense to me, whether it's ServiceNow or not. I don't think the principles. I do believe the principles still apply to any CMDB. So in terms of recapping, sensible, systematic approach, defining all of your owners and selecting domains and taking an iterative approach where it's one bit at a time, but selecting your most important things first and going from there. That all sounds good. I know you've got an ebook on this, so let me just transition. So for those of you who haven't worked it out yet, the QR code, which is sitting in the middle of the screen, that will take you to the Data Content Manager's ebook download page. So I've had a look through that, and that's what prompted me to get back in touch with Mikko and bring him along and just sort of highlight, pick out a few elements from the ebook. What else does it contain, Mikko?
Oh, what does it contain? I've been kind of providing all kinds of content lately, so not sure if I even remember, but it does provide some guidance on kind of how to figure out these domains, for example, and how to kind of split your CMDB or how to manage it on different levels, because some level of detail might be good for one customer and kind of another level of detail is better for service provider, for example. So there's some guidance on how to approach that, and also how to discuss to kind of different stakeholders. Maybe your IT steering group is happy with a bit more abstract and high-level discussions than the technical experts. So that's one thing. But the white paper is mainly about the scoping and these roles and making sure you have the kind of basic principles in place before starting the CSDM journey. And then it talks a little bit about tooling as well, like the role of discovery and these type of tools.
All of which I think is, it's really interesting stuff. And again, I'm going to say that a lot of it is applicable to multiple platforms because ServiceNow are not the only people who have a discovery tool and then presumably some sort of a widget that sits on an item to report back on any changes. I think a lot of tools do it in that manner, and that's the way they're keeping things as updated as possible within their platforms. But Data Content Manager itself is only applicable to the ServiceNow platform. So if there's anyone out there who wants to discuss that in more detail, or indeed any of the other ServiceNow models, then get in touch with Mikko because I don't know any more detail, and it belongs to ServiceNow, so it's up to them to share it. But it's been great to just have you along and just highlight some of the things that can be of use to other people as well. And to know that 20 years on from me trying to sort something out, that eventually it has been sorted out. And
I've actually seen some like non-ServiceNow organizations also taking CSDM model and kind of looking at it as a best practice without ServiceNow. So that's
I think that's the way I see it, as best practice. And I think it's up to version 4 now as well. So it obviously started out as not very best practice, but it's got to best practice now. So it's been through 4 iterations. So go have a look, people. It's been great to have you along, Miko. Just hang out in the green room. I'm going to end the broadcast shortly. Things might go black for you for a second or two, but I'll be back in a minute. So just give everybody a wave. Repeat. So thanks once again to Miko for coming along today. That was very interesting. And next time round on Friday, because we're live every Friday, apart from just after next Friday when I go on holiday for a couple of weeks, but we are live and well most Fridays on LinkedIn. Scan the QR code top of the page here to link to my profile, connect to me, see what's coming up next. But next Friday, it will be Jeff Smith from Monochrome, and we're going to be talking about supercharged service portals. And again, that's applicable regardless of what your platform is. But we will be discussing UX, UI, the differences between them, and how you can take your service portal to the next level. So that's it from me today. So it's goodbye, cheerio, game over, and hope to see you next time.